Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a second here. Give me 1 second. Hey, Jamila, I can't figure out how to do the live, so will you figure that out?
Yes, I will start doing that.
So, thank you. I see we have a good amount of people here. Tom, Joel, Libby, Jeff, Heidi, Tim, David, thank you for joining us. We are going to we have Andrew Webb here with the Group Living Code Amendment. So I have most of you on mute. If you would like to use the chat feature or raise your hand so we're not talking over each other, that would be great. What we're going to do is we're going to have Andrew go through the slide deck, and then we'll be able to start the Q&A. But before we do that, I would just like to take a moment and do a land acknowledgement. As we gather here today, we honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. This area was also the site of trading, hunting, gathering, and healing for many other Native nations, the Ute, Lakota, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, and many others. We recognize the indigenous people as the original stewards of the land and all the relatives within it, the animal nation, plant nations, insect nations, and stone. As those words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and affirmed. Let us acknowledge also the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. May we pay our respect to them and give them thanks. So with that, I will hand it over to Andrew Webb, who has been the city's point of contact on the Group Living Code Amendment. So take it away, Andrew.
Great, thank you very much, Councilwoman Sandoval. Again, I am Andrew Webb. I'm a city planner for community planning and development, and I am the project manager for this effort to update the zoning code's residential regulations. And so I'm going to go through a slideshow. It's a pretty complicated project, and so there was a lot of detail. I'll try to go through this as fast as I can so we can make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. So this is an effort to update the plan for, the zoning code for several reasons. To implement our adopted city goals as reflected in Blueprint Denver and the comprehensive plan for ensuring equitable and inclusive housing for everyone, addressing problems that we have recently identified or have known for a long time with the zoning code, outdated and unclear language, obstacles to establishment of much needed residential care facilities, and barriers to people just simply seeking flexible housing options for themselves. And then unpredictable permitting and notification requirements that have resulted from years of additions and amendments. This project would update the zoning code, so that is the set of regulations within Denver's ordinances that regulates the use of private land. So it establishes where different types of uses are permitted and the appropriate transitions and spacing between use. And it also has regulations about building form and site design, where parking is supposed to exist on a site, how large structures can be, that sort of thing. There are many other codes that regulate land use, and they will not change as part of this. They include the full Denver Revised Municipal Code, which has the standards, the basic standards for housing, the standards for maintenance of structures and yards, the use of public right-of-way, such as parking in the public street. That's not actually regulated by the zoning code. and then the operation of a lot of residential care type facilities like boarding houses and halfway houses or community corrections. There are also use-specific regulations outside of the city's purview, city, state, and federal licensing requirements, that sort of thing, industry certifications for different types of uses. And then the Building and Fire Code establishes the basic life safety requirements for housing and for residential care facilities and all types of places where people either gather or live. Sets minimum sizes for habitable rooms, basic structure requirements, fire safety, the requirement of, for instance, emergency escape windows in bedrooms. So this project has been going on for about 2.5 years. We've been working with a 45-member advisory committee of volunteers from all walks of life, people from who work for housing providers, people who have lived in all different types of housing, neighborhood members and R&O representatives. We really tried to pull together a group that could reflect and bring their either lived or occupational experience with the Denver zoning code to inform this process. That group met 36 times over the last couple of years. All those meetings were public, and you can read summaries of those meetings and see all the presentations and discussions we had at our project website in the archive. We've also met more than 35 times with R&Os and community organizations throughout the city, and we've held 5 big open house type events around the city during this project as well. To summarize what would change, we are proposing to consolidate residential care uses into a single use type and then regulate them just by size, not by population served, with spacing and density limitations to prevent concentration of larger facilities. Proposing a new upfront community meeting requirement prior to the establishment of larger residential care facilities, so people have neighborhoods receive mailed notification of a proposed larger residential care facility coming in, and can meet the operators and understand more about what's proposed and hopefully develop a relationship with the operator. We're proposing to allow more unrelated people to live as part of a household in a typical house, like a house or an apartment or a condo, but while clarifying with new definition language that rent by the room type configurations and other more commercial operations are only permitted in those zone districts where higher intensity residential uses like apartments are allowed. And then finally, creating a new congregate living use category in the zoning code that would be permitted again in those higher intensity zone districts, allowing re-emerging or new residential uses like single room occupancy, tiny home villages, rooming and boarding, other types of housing where people are not necessarily receiving care of some sort, but who are not living in a typical household. This chart shows the current breakdown of primary residential uses as they appear in the zoning code. There are essentially 2 buckets: household living on one side and then group living on the other side. And under group living, there's a subcategory of residential care, which includes some types of uses where people receive care. And then there are other group living uses that are not specifically identified as residential care, but where care is provided in some cases, and in some cases where it's not. What we're proposing is these 3 new buckets. So this is how we would propose to organize the code. Household living, as it is now, would be regular dwelling unit uses. Congregate living would be those uses that I described that are not a typical household, but are not a formal residential care type facility. Some unique and emerging uses would fall into this category. And then residential care, where receipt of care of some sort, whether that's supervision or treatment or shelter, if that is required as a condition of living there, then that identifies those uses as residential care. So to dig into some details here, the current regulations for dwelling unit uses are shown there on the left side of the slide. Currently, we regulate houses and everything else differently. So in a typical detached house, up to 2 partners or two unrelated adults are currently permitted to live with unlimited family members to each, and there are not currently any off-street parking requirements. In duplex or multi-unit uses, so essentially everything else that's not a detached house, up to 4 unrelated adults are permitted to live, again with unlimited family members. And those types of uses do have some off-street parking requirements in the zoning code. We are proposing to treat all dwelling units the same, whether they're houses or apartments, and allow up to 5 adults of any relationship with relatives to live in any dwelling unit, with provisions for additional adults in larger dwelling units. And then establish some new minimum off-street parking requirements for larger households. This gets into a little bit more of the details. Essentially, in any house up to 1,600 square feet, the mix of people who live as a family or the functional equivalent of a family as a housekeeping unit could be up to 5 unrelated adults. And then for every 200 additional square feet of finished floor area, that's the actual legally habitable space in a house, over 1,600 square feet, which is the median Denver household structure size. You could have 1 additional adult to a maximum of 10 unrelated adults in a house 2,600 square feet or larger. And then, as I mentioned, we would establish a new off-street parking requirement for households with 6 or more adult residents of any relationship. So going from where we currently have no off-street parking requirement, in most residential zone districts, you would have to have at least 1 or 2 vehicle parking spaces on the actual property itself. And you can see there on the right-hand side by zone district or by neighborhood context in the zoning code, how many spaces would be required. The chart there on the table on the left shows the number of unrelated adults that would be permitted in housing at various size thresholds. This is the definition that we're proposing for nonprofit housekeeping unit. That is a term that currently exists in the code, but it's not thoroughly defined. And so we're proposing to add a new definition to be real specific about what we mean when we talk about a nonprofit housekeeping unit. And that is essentially people who live as a family or as the functional equivalent of a family and who share the day-to-day household activities, who have chosen to jointly occupy the entire premises of the dwelling unit. And so being very clear that a rent by the room managed by some third party where the individual residents don't know each other and are coming and going would only be a rooming and boarding use, only allowed in the higher intensity zone districts where those types of uses are already allowed. This shows how we would regulate relatives. So the code currently allows unlimited relatives to live in a household. We would update the current language to acknowledge relationships like adoption or foster care or also adult guardianship as well. This slide shows a little bit more about the proposed congregate living regulations. I won't dwell on this too much, except to note that you can see at the bottom there the zone districts where these types of uses would be permitted. And so in multi-unit or apartment type zone districts, mixed-use districts, Main Street districts, and that's similar to where these types of uses are allowed now. And the parking requirement for congregate living would be half a space per 1,000 square feet. And so you can see an example there of how many spaces would be required for a development like a co-living development. That co-living is where you have sort of like some college dorms are configured where people have their own kind of sleeping space, but they then share living space and kitchens and in some cases bathrooms. These are the proposed regulations for residential care. So on the left, you can see the current regulations. We essentially break down residential care into small and large currently, with small being those that serve 8 or fewer guests, and large being those that being essentially everything else. And then shelters and community corrections are those uses that are specifically called out for additional regulations that have had the cumulative effect of making it very difficult or nearly impossible in some cases to actually establish those much needed types of facilities. So as I mentioned, we would move away from identifying different types of residential care differently and regulate it all the same by size. And you'll see there on the right-hand side the number of guests that would be permitted in each tier. So type 1 would be similar to what is currently called small. And then the additional, or the next tiers up essentially have additional regulations. They're allowed only in higher intensity zone districts and have spacing and density requirements. This slide gets into a little bit more detail about that. You can see that for the type 2 facilities would be allowed in the low intensity zone districts. And I should note here that larger residential care facilities are currently allowed in residential zone districts, and there are many in existence in neighborhoods around the city. There are currently about 130 total residential care facilities in Denver. The type 3 and type 4 facilities would not be allowed in single unit or 2-unit or row house zone districts, only in the highest intensity districts. And as you can see, as you get into the larger facilities, you have more spacing requirements, up to 3 blocks of spacing in some places. And then the largest facilities, there would also be a density requirement that would limit the total number of facilities that could be within a 1-mile radius to ensure that we're not concentrating large facilities in any one part of the city. These are the proposed parking requirements for residential care. So a half a space per 1,000 feet in most zone districts to ensure that we have parking for employees. This doesn't mean that a particular operator can't choose to provide more parking if they feel like their clients and their staff needs more, but this would be the minimum requirement. I do want to highlight a few changes that were made to the proposals that some of you may have seen when we did the open houses in February and March. We got a lot of feedback about some of the earlier versions of these proposals, especially the household size. So the third column over shows what we proposed. At that time, we were proposing 8 adults in any dwelling unit up to 1,600 square feet, with additional adults for every additional 200 square feet over that, with no maximum requirement. We have, in response to some of the feedback we heard, we have pulled that number down to 5 adults, unrelated adults in any dwelling unit, preserving that provision that would allow more unrelated adults in larger households, but with a maximum cap in houses of any size. And I will highlight here that we had originally proposed doing away with the allowance for relatives of any age, and have gone back to allowing or proposing to allow unlimited relatives. And the reason for that is that we do have many multi-generational family households in Denver, and we don't want to, want to be careful about making houses that are currently conforming or currently legal homes, because you can have an unlimited number of relatives. We would not want to make those non-conforming by establishing a lower threshold of total adults. So the current allowance for unlimited adults would be preserved here. We also heard a lot about parking. People were especially concerned about lack of availability of on-street parking. So we are proposing to require, as I mentioned earlier, 1 to 2 off-street parking, vehicle parking spaces for houses with 6 or more adults. And then we're also proposing a new requirement, a maximum 6 vehicles per dwelling unit on any zone lot. There are currently no limits to the number of vehicles that you can have on your zone lot, although the municipal code precludes the parking of vehicles like RVs and boats in the front setback. And I'll also just note that the zoning code only allows, in most cases, up to about 30% of a front setback to be used and surfaced and used for parking, and that would remain the same. So you can't turn your whole yard into a parking lot. And then finally, we did get feedback about the tier 2, the second threshold or size level of residential care and low income or low intensity residential zone districts. And so we are proposing an additional requirement there of a minimum 12,000 square foot lot size to ensure that where those larger facilities might go would be on properties that can provide the appropriate buffering, and in most cases would be properties that have been used previously for some civic or use, like a church or something like that. And I would just note here that in a single unit or 2-unit zone district, the permitted building forms are houses, and so this wouldn't allow somebody an operator to build a sort of an institutional structure there. But as is currently the case, operators can use a house structure as a smaller residential care facility. So this is the last slide. These are the next steps in the process. There is a planning board hearing next week, Wednesday, August 19th. The planning board is a volunteer board that considers recommendations from community planning and development on text amendments and zone map amendments, and then makes a recommendation to the city council, which will hear it and consider these proposed amendments in a series of hearings through the fall. And we tentatively expect the final public hearing would be in mid-October. So you can go to the project website there, the URL is right there, and review the proposed draft of the amendments. You can see slide decks like this one that summarize the amendments. And we are, I'll just note that we're taking written comment to provide to the planning board. You can send that to me, and my contact information is there. And you can also see at the project website information about how to participate in the meeting, how to sign up to provide spoken testimony at that meeting as well. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank
you, Andrew. That was really fast. So if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself. I have everyone muted, so if you need to be unmuted, please let us know so that you could ask Andrew some questions.
Looks like Robert Rodriguez has raised his hand.
Okay.
Well, this is Manny Rodriguez, and with Robert Rodriguez, we're wondering, we have 2 questions. One is, what about the community corrections facility non-conforming use? What happens to that, and what are the new regulations for that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That is, so we are proposing some changes to the way existing non-conforming facilities can continue. So the code currently allows legally established non-conforming facilities to exist, but there are limitations on the expansion of, or improvement of structures, or rebuilding a structure if there's a fire. Limitations on transferring those uses to a new operator. We are proposing to update the way existing facilities that are non-conforming can operate, to treat them as a legal conforming use as originally established. That would allow them to continue their existence where they are. It would allow them to improve or expand structures. And would allow transfer of operations to a new provider. If one of those operators wanted to expand the number of people served in a facility, they would need to get a new zoning permit under the current proposed the current proposed system for residential care uses, and so would have to demonstrate that they're able to meet the new use limitations and permitted zone districts. But existing facilities would be allowed to continue and to reconstruct or improve their structures if necessary.
Does that answer your question, Manny? Robert or Manny, does that answer your question?
Okay, well, the part about expanding the amount of beds, is that part of the new zoning? Is that with it, or?
To expand the amount of the capacity for residents, you would have to get a new zoning permit under the new system. But if you have a facility that is allowed, let me go back in the slides here real quick. A facility that falls into one of these tiers and is permitted in the zone district, then you could apply for a new zoning permit for residential care use and expand to whatever was permitted by that permit.
So under that permit that we have now, the non-conforming, now the only thing I remember is that it was in a R1. I'm not sure what it is now. Is that considered low density?
That is so. That is an old. That is a zone code district from the old zoning code, or former Chapter 59, I believe. The property that your facility is on, if I'm not mistaken, was updated to the new zoning code districts in 2010, and I believe it's 2-unit now, or TU. And so that zone district, if these amendments are adopted, would allow a facility up to serve up to 40 people.
So, but I have 75 there now. So what would happen there?
So a facility that currently exists and was legally established would be able to continue its operating exactly as it is now.
But to expand, I would have to go through the new zoning process.
And to expand, you would have to seek a zone change first to a zone district that allows a facility that big from the current 2-unit district, and then get a permit for a larger facility.
But I could build a better structure to add recreation or more office space. That would be okay.
That's correct.
Okay. The other question I have is, my other facility I have in South Denver is a PUD. What happens to that? That's a facility that I got a PUD. Does that remain the same?
It does, and you know, these amendments would change the basic regulations of underlying zone districts in the code, but they don't change anybody's zoning. So if you wanted to do something on that property that's not allowed by the custom zoning that is established there now, the PUD, you would have to rezone the property first. And then come in for a new use permit under the new zoning.
If I wanted to make a change and get my non-conforming use before this is started, would I would I do it at planning, or would I do it at the city council to get a grandfather clause to allow me to expand my beds?
Well, that's a request that you can, you know, send to us, and if you're talking about your facility, I'm not sure, you know, what we're proposing would not allow expansion of beds in a non-conforming facility. It would allow continued operation and reconstruction of that facility, but would not allow expansion. So to actually expand a facility, you would have to, I think in both cases, get a zone change before you would have the option of coming in for a new zoning permit under this new system.
Well, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see that we have Timbers. Tim, can you unmute yourself, or do you need me to unmute you? There
I
you
am
go.
unmuted.
Perfect.
Andrew, I'm with Highland United Neighbors, an RNO. I guess my initial question is, will you guys be responding to INC's resolution to separate this into 3 chunks and give everybody a little bit more time to review things?
No, we respectfully disagree with their position. These are highly interrelated uses that are all within the same section of the code, and the access to housing, essentially, which is, you know, our overarching goal is ensuring that people have access and flexibility with obtaining housing and staying housed. And as the flexibility of one type of housing goes down, the need for other types of housing goes up. So it would not be practical or timely pull these apart and regulate them separately. So we as a department will not be proposing to do these as separate amendments.
Okay. I think the piece that I'm most interested in is the lack of time we have to really review this. I understand this has been a long process, but getting down to final language, going to planning board. Highland has 21 different zone districts in our neighborhood. And it means we've got a lot of homework to do to get through and check what this does in every district in our neighborhood.
Well, and I'd be certainly happy to if you have an upcoming meeting of your RNO and want to go through some of those districts and understand specifically what might be and would not be allowed, I'd be more than happy to participate in something like that.
Okay, well, I guess I would say maybe some outreach sooner would have been helpful, but I appreciate the offer now.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for all you do for Northwest Denver and Highland. Does anyone else have any questions? I see other people on the line. I see Tom and Libby and Jeff Laws. Is there anyone else who have any questions? So what we'll do is we can put the slide deck into, I'll try to figure out if we could put it in the chat. And then we'll have Andrew review a couple different timeframes. But in the meantime, Jeff has raised his hand. Jeff, let me unmute you and then you can go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff.
Very much. Hey, Andrew, I just got a couple of questions for you. And I live in the Regis neighborhood. What kind of testing have you guys completed to see what kind of effect this will have on the city at large?
So it's difficult to test regulations because the regulations allow for residents or residential care providers to do things. It sort of gets out of the way of different types of development of residential uses. But it doesn't say that certain uses have to go in a certain place. I'm not aware of any sort of impending plans for a specific facilities to actually open anywhere. But this just kind of clarifies the city's goals for where facilities should go, how they should be more equitably distributed throughout the city. We have gotten a lot of questions about things like property values and that sort of thing, and household size, and we have certainly looked at how other cities that regulate these things differently have been impacted. So most notably, and I think that of most interest to a lot of people is the proposed change to the household definition to allow more unrelated people to live together. And the zoning code, or the Denver zoning code's regulations are very conservative compared to most of our peer cities, not only larger peer cities in the U.S., but cities in the Front Range as well, where most of our surrounding neighbors allow up to 5 unrelated people to be part of a household. And so one of the things we've heard is a concern that this will encourage people to buy up houses and rent them out, and that the household sizes in general will get larger. And so we did reach out to some peer cities to ask them if they have seen a change in the way housing is provided and kind of investment or landlord operational patterns. And we talked to colleagues in Austin and Phoenix and Seattle. And they weren't aware of changes like that, although I'll note that there are no cities that we could find that have made this change recently, with one exception. Bend, Oregon did recently do away with all limitations on related or unrelated adults in a household. And so we'll certainly be closely watching that to see if it changes. But most cities have had these kind of regulations on the books for a long time. And when we looked at data for average household size, we found that it's essentially the same in most cities. So Denver is about 2.4 people, and all the cities that we looked at that provide or that allow for more unrelated people to live as a household have a very similar household size number, and on average, which suggests that regardless of the regulations, people generally choose to live the same way. You will have some larger households, as we do currently. We have a lot of, we do have some large family households now. But what we have seen is that allowing this additional flexibility, allowing people to choose who they want to live with and how they want to live, does not appear to have changed the patterns of how people live together in other places. With regard to property values as they relate to residential care, a separate thing. And residential care is, 130 residential care facilities in Denver, and about 380 total households in Denver. So it's a much smaller percentage of the total use of housing structures in Denver. We didn't do any studies ourselves. It's hard to do kind of predictive analyses of impacts on property values, but we did look at the existing body of research out there that has shown that proximity to things like shelters and halfway houses does not appear to have a reportable or notable impact on property values, and certainly not when compared to the proximity to shopping centers and busy streets, which have been shown to have a clearer connection to property value impacts.
So that's a short way of saying you didn't do any testing, correct?
We have not done, we've certainly tested scenarios to make sure that we understand, what could possibly occur if we change the zoning code, but we have not, if you mean like, have we actually tested it on a particular site? No, we have not.
Gotcha. And this change would effectively allow for-profit businesses to be established in residential neighborhoods with no spacing requirements. Well, please explain to me what kind of permitting and regulation is required to establish a business in a.
So when you're talking about a residential care facility?
It's a business, correct?
Many of them are, yeah. And I should note that they're already allowed in neighborhoods, and about half of the ones that currently exist are in neighborhoods. The most common types that exist in a residential zone district where only house structures can be built are small assisted living facilities, and recovery homes are the two probably the most common examples of that use currently. All of those types of uses their operations are regulated by the revised municipal code, separate from the zoning code that has the business licensing requirements. So our excise and license division requires a business license for all, they call them personal care boarding houses and assisted living homes. And then community corrections specifically has a whole section of very specific regulations and statutes, both in city and state law, that regulate those. And then finally, those types of uses do have to come in and get a zoning permit as well, which is where allows CPD development services staff to review and make sure that the proposal is meeting all of the zoning requirements. There are actually spacing requirements proposed between larger facilities. Currently, there are not spacing requirements for the smallest residential care facilities, and that would remain the case. But any facility serving more than serving 11 or more people would have to be, in most cases, at least 3 blocks away from another similar residential care facility.
So there is currently requirement for licensing and regulation of businesses in residential neighborhoods as you're describing here?
There are, yes, those are within the revised municipal code. Sets forth the requirements for licensing of all types of businesses, but including residential care businesses.
And so the neighbor has a recourse if the for-profit business established next door is not managed well.
That's correct.
And recourse?
They do, and they do through zoning as well. If they are failing to meet a zoning requirement, such as if they are housing more people than their zoning permit allows, or if they're not providing the parking that is required by the zoning permit, zoning permits are also revocable.
So do you think that the increase in density will result in larger structures being built in TU and SU to accommodate more people?
So when we think of density, when we talk about density, we think about it in terms of actual dwelling units, and this would not allow additional dwelling units, new kitchens, that sort of thing. And additionally, we'd had, and now I think it sounds like you're talking more about households now rather than more formal residential care.
We're talking about number of people in
a household,
and you need a bigger house to accommodate more people.
Yeah, so as is currently the case, currently unlimited number of relatives are allowed to live together in any house. And the housing code, also outside the zoning code, establishes the basic requirement of a functioning kitchen, functioning bathroom facilities, and then the building and fire code sets forth all the requirements for smoke alarms and escape windows in a conforming bedroom, that sort of thing, and none of that would change. We did have some people through the process, some suggestions from some stakeholders that we should regulate by bedroom. And we actually moved away from that because one of the things we did here is that in some cities that regulate by bedroom, that tended to encourage the in some cases non-conforming subdivision of houses to add additional bedrooms, especially in basements. So we want to not encourage people to haphazardly add bedrooms. And then I would also just note that any house that has 11 or more adults living in it has to have a sprinkler system in Denver per the fire code. So once you get to that size of a group of people living in a house, and that includes family homes as well, if you're retrofitting a house to house more people, you would have those types of limits outside of the zoning code as well. And based on that and our understanding from other places that have allowed unrelated people to live together as kind of chosen family for years, or in some cases decades, and have not seen a notable change in actual average household size, we don't actually expect that people will change the way they live, and that people will still choose to live in houses that are appropriately sized, and if they want to live as a bigger group, would live in a house that is already larger.
So in the event that some of these provisions have a negative effect, is there anything in your reckoning that would allow this to be withdrawn or amended in the future?
So the CPD or monitors all adopted changes to the zoning code into the future to make sure they're effective, and we certainly can always go back and re-amend. It's up to the city council ultimately, which adopts amendments to the zoning code. But we're also actually in response to requests like what you just mentioned, looking at some specific metrics that we might actually track, and we're exploring the possibility of a formal kind of post-adoption monitoring system that would ensure that we're not seeing unintended consequences, and would inform an effort at some point to go back in and make changes if necessary.
But you can't commit now to that monitoring system?
I can say it's something that we are in favor of, but we are still kind of figuring out how something like that would work. But as this goes through the adoption process, if we're able to put something together like that we think would be effective, then we would make it, kind of part of the adopting ordinance, so that it would be kind of made official as it goes through the city council legislative review process.
I guess the concern that we have here in North Denver is that we bore the brunt, and I'm talking about slot homes, we bore the brunt of an untested, unforeseen change in the code.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time for CPD to react. And as a result, you will drive down Tennyson and we just have some concern that you're foisting this on. I know it's been a lot of work, and I think we're all in favor of providing adequate housing, but there needs to be some mechanism to keep studying it, to monitoring it.
Yeah.
We don't have unintended consequences that we've experienced in the past.
I hope that you will, and I've made a note of that, and I've heard that from a lot of people as well, and I hope you'll actually note that in writing, if you haven't already, to us as well, so that we can add that to the record, and we can kind of talk about it in the early stages of going through planning board, and start to work to formalize how something like that might work moving forward.
And Jeff, I mentioned that was something I had a briefing on the other day with Andrew, and it's something that I'm very interested as well. And I mentioned specifically monitoring it, and how could it come back to us, like within a year, or get some type of update because of the unintended consequences of the 2010 zoning code and other unintended consequences that we are still facing 10 years later from the code update. So thank you for bringing that up. And Jeff, if you and your neighbors want to draft letters and send them to Andrew and myself, that would be great, so that I could speak to those as this is coming through the process. I'd greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Agreed.
Yeah. And
Thank
with that,
you.
thank you, Jeff. Thanks for all the advocacy you do in Berkeley Regis. We have Tom Mobley. So Tom, I'm going to ask to unmute you, and you can unmute yourself and you can start asking questions.
Thank you, Amanda. I think I understand the answer to my question, but I just want to verify, and it's somewhat triggered by a comment that, Amanda, you made at one of the Brunn meetings not too long ago. You know that Mount St. Vincent's a very important neighbor to us here in Harkness Heights. It's not within our perimeter, but it's a very important neighbor. We care a great deal about it, and we're very much invested in their long-term health and survivability. Does this have any implications for Mount St. Vincent's, which is a group home? Well, it's a care facility, among other services.
I'll speak to that in a general sense. This wouldn't impact any existing facilities. This wouldn't make facilities that currently exist non-conforming. In some cases, it might expand the opportunity that an existing facility has to request a new zoning permit to change their operation or add additional flexibility to their operation. But in no individual cases of existing sites would these changes make those uses have to go away or change the way they operate.
Would these changes have any impact on St. Vincent's if they wanted to expand?
It's a great question, and I don't feel like I can answer it off the cuff, but I'd love to take a look actually and look at the actual site, figure out what its zoning is, and see what this might mean to that specific site. Tom, can I get your email, or can I maybe you can email me, and I'm going to pull my email address back up here. And I know the site, I know where Mount St. Vincent is. If you would maybe reach out to me, or if you feel comfortable telling me your email address, I can just reach out to you, and I will look at that particular site and tell you what the implications would be.
Sure. It's Tom Mobley, no punctuation, at mac.com.
TOMMOBLEY@mac.com.
Correct.
You can expect to hear from me by early next week on that. I'll take a look.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you all so much. This is great that we've had Andrew here, and we've been able to, I put the slide deck in the chat. It is a Google Drive, so everyone should be able to click on it and you'll be able to see the PDF. And once again, Andrew, in the chat function, can you just share the time frame? So planning boards next week, and then after planning board, if it successfully moves forward and gets voted to move to city council, or do you have a slide that you could do?
I can put it in the, so the planning board hearing it was on that last slide that I just had. It is August 19th. If that goes through planning board and they send it out with a recommendation, let me pull up my calendar here real quick. If it comes out of planning board with a recommendation, that would most likely bring us to the LUTI, Land Use Infrastructure or Land Use Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Council Subcommittee in early September, and then ultimately to a City Council final public hearing on October 12th. But again, all those dates are tentative, contingent on what the planning board decides to do. And then ultimately the LUTI committee would have the option of perhaps holding it over for an additional hearing or discussion as well. So generally what we say is we expect the legislative review process to continue into the fall.
Okay, I put that in the chat. And for Tim Burrs, if he wanted to get you on one of their agendas, I can connect you to, and you can meet with the Honey PCD maybe in there.
We'd be happy to, and we've been doing these at the invitation of RNOs pretty much all year, and do one or two of them a week, and are happy to do more. So if they're able to set something up, we'll be glad to be there and present and take questions. And I can speak more to their specific zone districts and get a little bit more, drill down a little bit further on the impacts there.
Yeah, Highland's complicated, having 21 zone districts.
Indeed, yeah.
And doing the testing on that is a lot for a registered neighborhood organization. Well, unless there's any burning questions from the audience, I would say that I think we've spent a good amount of time from this. And if they're in the chat, once again, I'll just say that there's a link to the Google Doc that is the slide presentation. And then there's the Andrew Webb's information on how to contact him to write letters of support or your feelings that would like to get in the public record before next Wednesday. Is there a cutoff date, Andrew, so that if people for the planning board, what's the moment that they can submit a letter for it to go into the packet?
We will take comments right up until noon the day of the hearing, so noon on August 19th. And then after that, we'll continue to collect those comments, and they'll be provided ultimately as part of the packet that goes to the City Council. And I'd also add that on the project website, which I put a link to that there in the chat, are the presentation that I went through today, as well as a longer presentation that actually has links to all of the revised municipal code and the state standards and statutes for community corrections, that sort of thing, are all linked in detail in there. If I know some members of the audience here had some questions about how those types of uses are regulated outside of the zoning code. So you can find some of that information on the website in our summary slide decks.
All right. Well, with that, I don't think that we have any more questions, and it seems like we had a good pair of participants, and I would say that since there's not much else going on, we could probably end this meeting. We are going to take the link, and once it's recorded, we will post it to our Facebook and share it out via social media so that people can see the conversation that we had here and also have access to the presentation. Thank you, Andrew, for your time, and thank you all who joined us, and thank my staff for helping us today to get this done.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.